Mr. Greg Medcraft, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, board members of the Financial Services Commission, Mr. Daneshwar Thakur, Chief Executive of the Financial Services Commission, members of the RCE Governing Board, distinguished panelists and speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, good morning and good evening to our local and overseas participants. As head of the Regional Center of Excellence, on behalf of the FSC and the OECD, I would like to express our warm welcome to all of you from different parts of the world for your participation to this workshop, and our heartfelt thanks to the speakers for their valuable support to make the workshop possible today.
Governance of state-owned enterprises and privatisation, and a joint event delivered by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the Government of Mauritius's Regional Centre for Excellence, in which I again congratulate the initiative by Mauritius. The OECD collaborated on the Centre's launch last year, and our involvement in this initiative seeks to achieve three things. First, we want to make the lessons learned by our members in their path of their economic development and the policy tools that they've used along the way available to African governments. Many African nations are at a stage of their development where they are now interested in benefiting from the experience and adopting approaches of OECD members, or at least using them as a reference point in their own economic journey. Second, we want to engage with the region so that these tools and practices that might need to be adapted to local conditions and needs, but we recognise that our standards and best practices may need to be contextualised to meet the needs, as I say, of economies at a different stage of development. But again, a good reference point. Our involvement in the Regional Centre for Excellence is very much an exchange. We are here to learn from you as well, and to hear about the needs of the region, and to see where and how we can work with you to align local policy with OECD best practices and international norms. And thirdly, the OECD's motto is fostering better policies for better lives. It's what we do. It's a sort of in our DNA. And part of that is about fostering cooperation between all countries. This is a necessary precondition for establishing a level playing field, which clearly is a very important priority for the region. And our collaboration with the Regional Centre for Excellence is, again, it's a platform to bring together policymakers and regulators together to, first of all, again, strengthen the patterns of collaboration, to promote shared learning, and thirdly is to provide an opportunity to align policy approaches and meet shared challenges. So today's topic on SOE governance and best practices in privatisation is an important one. We know that privatisation can play an important role in stimulating capital market development. It can increase capitalisation and strengthen liquidity in markets and encourage a shareholding culture within a jurisdiction, whether it be on the retail or wholesale side. It also flows through to other government priorities such as capital formation in the support of wider economic growth, the attraction of foreign investment, and the funding of pension schemes. It's also obviously of renewed importance in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic across advanced and emerging economies for two reasons. First is that government support for businesses may take the form of equity injections, which mean governments may take on ownership stakes that were not planned and actually maybe not align with their usual economic strategy. In this case, the resolution of business support as the crisis abates may mean privatisation of those stakes. And in the meantime, the company will need to be managed as a state-owned enterprise. Second, is the support privatisation can bring to government revenue. Many governments are now turning their attention to the long-term costs of COVID-19, both in terms of lost output and additional cost to support programs, which obviously have in some cases been quite considerable. The strain on public finances in some countries, has started to make countries think about privatisation of existing entities where perhaps they may not have done it previously. So it has changed that discussion. So whatever your policy goals of privatisation, a successful process is actually not a foregone conclusion. It obviously requires careful government planning. It needs close engagement with stakeholders and a consideration of the wider financial and economic context. And I must say, from my own country, Australia, I've seen this over decades. So whatever the policy goals of privatisation, a successful process is not, again, a foregone conclusion. It requires, again, careful planning, and is exactly what we're going to cover here today. We're going to hear from my colleagues at the OECD on practices and policy instruments that are available to governments. We're going to hear experiences and lessons learned in privatisation from emerging and middle-income countries that will be relevant in the regional context. And we'll have the opportunity to hear from one another about local needs. So let me conclude by again thanking the Financial Services Commission of Mauritius, our host for today's event, and by thanking you all for actually joining us here today in the spirit of learning, exchange.
Mr. Greg Midcroft, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs of the OECD, board members of the Financial Services Commission, Ms. Pauline Cherazak, board member of the RCE Governing Board, distinguished panelists and speakers, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. So let me all now wish you a very good afternoon, perhaps a very good morning for those who are joining us remotely. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to this workshop on the best practices in privatization, organized under the aegis of the Regional Center of Excellence, or the RCE, and in collaboration with the OECD. Of course, we would have wished that the workshop of today could be held with all of us participants on site, when we would have welcomed you with our Mauritian hospitality. However, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, we need now to start adapting to this new normality. The RCE will nevertheless continue to deliver on its mandate, and we have therefore been able to organize this workshop partly on site for the members present here and partly virtual. Ladies and gentlemen, discussions and information sharing are key elements that help to transform us into high-caliber professionals. And in this context, we believe that the RCE has got a very prominent role to play. You would be aware the RCE was launched in March 2019 and has as main focus the development of capacity building programs aimed primarily at financial services regulators from the southern and eastern African regions. I would like to point that the RCE is the only center of excellence of the OECD in the African region. The objectives of the RCE also include the conduct of research on topical themes relevant to financial services and financial malpractices for the regional market, and recommendation or advice on minimum standards that reflect ground market realities. The collaboration with the OECD is based on a memorandum of understanding between the government of Mauritius and the OECD. I have the pleasure to announce that the MOU has now been renewed for a further period of 5 years, and this gives us more space to roll out our programs. Amidst the new context and challenges, we have taken steps to give the RCE the means to become a center of international repute. The board of the Financial Services Commission has always been supportive of the RCE. And the RCE has now a governing board comprising of representatives of the Bank of Mauritius, the ICAC, the OECD, and the FSC to advise on the strategy and actions to be adopted by the RCE. The governing board would, in its capacity as an advisory board, oversee the operations of the RCE. The RCE has now been adequately staffed and is now managed by a head of RCE. We further underscore the support of the Bank of Mauritius in the contribution of the activities of the RCE going forward. So coming back to the subject of the workshop today, I note with pleasure that we have speakers from the OECD and a number of countries, namely India, Nigeria, Turkey, and Ukraine. And we also note that we have several participants from at least 12 different countries who have already joined us virtually. And I wish them a very warm welcome. I'm sure that the deliberations and interactions with you here in this room and those attending virtually will enrich this event. At the end, like Rick, I would like to extend a note of thanks to those who have been behind the scenes for the organization of this workshop, not only staff of the RCE, but those who have made this event a success. Last but not least, my thank also goes to Mr. Oliver from the OECD, who has guided us towards the organization of this event. A special note goes to Mr. Hans Biltu, present here, partner of KPMG Advisory, who has accepted to be our panelist in this event today. I pray that the pandemic is over very soon, and it will then be a pleasure for us to host you all in the RCE for the events planned in future. So on this note, I thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, and wish you a very fruitful deliberation. Merci.